Hi, this is Jason with Divine Frustrations, and just wanted to share with you another frustration that I recently received. And this is a very sobering one. It's pertaining to the concept of innocent victims. And the writer of this particular frustration expressed doubts about whether or not God ever intervenes to prevent senseless acts of violence. And again, this is one of those topics that really cuts to the heart of how we understand God and how we understand his dealings in the world. And it's something that certainly resonates with a lot of people because of the pain and suffering that's involved in these tragedies that happens all too often. Now, let me just say before I go into my response that I devote an entire chapter in the book, Divine Frustrations, to this very topic. The title of that chapter is Sovereignty and the Vulnerable. And so I encourage you, if you're serious about going deeper on this, to consult that particular chapter where I go into much more detail than what I'm going to share here. So when we really think about the concept of innocent victims, I'm not going to get into the theology behind innocence that some people do and really focus more on that than just the realities of what we see in our day-to-day experience. And it is something that I resonate with as well. The person who sent this frustration in said that they work with a lot of people who reported a lot of different episodes of different kinds of pain, suffering, and the trauma that those experiences leave with them. And I can relate to that because as a mental health counselor, I work with a variety of people also. And trauma is certainly one of those realities that can have a lasting impact on a person, especially if they've had to endure being victimized in some innocent way. So, this is a very serious and very, as I said earlier, sobering topic. So, what I'll try to do is provide a brief response. And then again, I encourage you to go to the book Divine Frustrations and read the chapter on sovereignty and the vulnerable to go into more depth. So, when we think about the concept of innocent victims suffering, senseless acts of violence, and where is God in all of that, and what's the purpose behind these occurrences, it really boils down to how we understand what's unfolding in the world. It really boils down to how we understand humans and our place in this world and how we understand God and his sovereignty over the world in which we live. And if we understand those two components properly, then that can affect how we see what happens to innocent victims, how we perceive God's involvement or intervention in it, and ultimately how we cope with these kinds of realities. It's not something that we can just appeal to free will because, sometimes it's things that affect even small children, and they, of course, are not exerting any kind of free will with regards to the suffering that they sometimes encounter. So, sometimes that's an explanation that's offered, but sometimes it's more to it than that. And so the frustration here is really about God's intervention. And why don't we perhaps see more senseless acts of violence prevented? Why is it that every time we turn on the news or turn on the internet, we see one more tragedy after another? So it really, as I said a little while ago, it really goes back to how we understand who we are, why we're in this world, what is our purpose for being here, what is our ultimate destiny when this life is over, and ultimately, what are God's answers to those questions? And if we understand all of those questions in reasonable ways and in ways that can work for us and in ways that are consistent with the realities that we experience, then we can have a different, perhaps even better perspective on the larger topic of innocent victims. Because we need more understanding of those components, those realities, in order to really have some kind of way of coping with the realities that we see in this world, and not just coping with them, but trying to make sense of them to some extent. No one likes the idea of being an innocent victim. No one likes the idea of innocent victims suffering in our world. But there is so much more to this. And that's one of the reasons why I say, I direct you to the chapter that I have in the book, Sovereignty and the Vulnerable, because it really goes into more explanation, more detail, provides specific examples, and gives some various considerations on this particular topic. So again, if you really want to go more in depth with this, then I encourage you read the chapter on sovereignty and the vulnerable in the book Divine Frustrations. And if you do, be sure to leave a review, or you could even send me another message through the website. Let me know what you think, and perhaps that can get another conversation going.